Jake Morrison stood at the window of his small apartment on Earth Station Alpha and watched the stars. He had been an engineer for 22 years and had worked on projects that most people could only dream about. But lately, things had been different. The aliens called Zephyrians controlled most of the galaxy's technology, and they rarely asked humans for help with anything important. That morning changed everything. A message came through the official channels from Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire. Jake read it 3 times before he believed what it said. The Zephyrians wanted him to come to their most advanced research station called Nexus Prime. They needed his help with a project that could change the future of energy production in the galaxy. Jake walked to his kitchen and made coffee while thinking about the message. The Zephyrians had never invited a human engineer to work on their top-secret projects before. They usually gave humans small jobs like maintenance work or basic construction. This invitation was different, and Jake wondered why they had chosen him. The door chimed and Lisa Carter walked in. She was Jake's closest friend and had worked with him on many projects over the years. Lisa was a xenobiologist, which meant she studied alien life forms. She sat down at Jake's small table and looked at him with concern. "You look like someone just told you the world was ending," Lisa said as she accepted a cup of coffee from Jake. "What happened?" Jake showed her the message on his tablet. Lisa read it carefully and her eyes grew wide. She looked up at Jake and shook her head slowly. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "The Zephyrians never ask humans to work on their advanced technology. They think we're too primitive to understand their science." Jake nodded and sat down across from her. "That's what I thought too. But look at the details. They want me to help develop quantum resonance extractors that can harvest energy from neutron stars. If this works, it could solve the galaxy's energy problems forever." Lisa leaned back in her chair and studied Jake's face. "And you're thinking about accepting?" "I'm thinking this might be humanity's chance to prove we're more than just manual laborers," Jake replied. "If I can help them solve this problem, maybe they'll start treating humans as equals instead of junior partners." The next day, Jake met with Dr. Marcus Webb at the Human Federation headquarters. Dr. Webb was the research director and had the authority to approve Jake's participation in the Zephyrian project. Webb was a tall man with gray hair who always wore expensive suits. He had a reputation for being ambitious, and Jake had never fully trusted him. "This is an incredible opportunity," Webb said as he reviewed the Zephyrian proposal. "They're offering to share technology that's centuries ahead of anything we have. We'd be foolish to refuse." Jake studied Webb's expression and noticed something that bothered him. Webb seemed too eager about the project. Most humans who dealt with the Zephyrians were cautious because the aliens had a history of making promises they didn't keep. "I want to bring a small team," Jake said. "Lisa Carter for xenobiology support and maybe 2 or 3 other specialists." Webb agreed immediately, which surprised Jake. Usually, Webb argued about team size and budget concerns. This time, he seemed willing to approve anything Jake wanted. 2 weeks later, Jake found himself aboard a Zephyrian transport ship heading toward Nexus Prime. The ship was unlike anything humans had built. The walls seemed to glow with their own light and the floors felt warm under his feet. Everything was designed for beings much taller than humans, but the Zephyrians had installed smaller furniture for their human guests. Lisa sat beside Jake during the journey and they both stared out the viewport at the neutron star that was their destination. The star was incredibly dense and spun thousands of times per second. It created powerful magnetic fields that could tear apart normal matter. "How do you extract energy from something like that?" Lisa asked quietly. Jake had been wondering the same thing. "The theory is that quantum resonance extractors can tap into the star's rotational energy without getting close enough to be destroyed. But the engineering challenges are enormous." The transport ship docked with Nexus Prime 3 days later. Jake's first view of the station took his breath away. It was massive, easily 10 times larger than the biggest human space station. The structure was made of a metal that seemed to shift colors as the light hit it. Huge towers extended from the main body, and Jake could see energy conduits running between them. Commander Veltar met them at the docking bay. He was tall even for a Zephyrian, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. He wore robes that seemed to move on their own and spoke with a voice that sounded like music. "Engineer Morrison," Veltar said in perfect English. "Welcome to Nexus Prime. We are honored to have someone of your talents join our research team." Jake felt uncomfortable with the praise. Zephyrians rarely complimented humans, and when they did, it usually meant they wanted something. Scientist Kextan was introduced as Jake's primary contact for the project. He was younger than Veltar and seemed more friendly toward humans. Kextan showed Jake and his team to their quarters, which were surprisingly luxurious. Each human had a private room with a view of the neutron star. "Your work will begin tomorrow," Kextan explained. "We have been working on this project for 5 years, but have encountered problems that our best scientists cannot solve. We believe human engineering approaches might provide the breakthrough we need." That evening, Jake explored the parts of the station that were open to him. The corridors were wide and tall, designed for Zephyrian proportions. But Jake noticed something strange. There were sections of the station that were clearly marked as restricted, more than seemed necessary for a research facility. He also noticed that the junior Zephyrian staff seemed nervous around the humans. They would stop talking when Jake or his team approached, and they avoided making eye contact. This behavior was unusual because Zephyrians were normally confident and direct in their communications. Jake returned to his quarters and reviewed the technical specifications for the quantum resonance extractors. The project was incredibly complex and would require innovations in material science, energy manipulation, and quantum physics. It was exactly the kind of challenge that Jake loved, but something felt wrong. The Zephyrians had never needed human help with advanced technology before. Their science was centuries ahead of humanity's best efforts. Why would they suddenly want Jake's input on their most important energy project? As Jake prepared for sleep, he made a decision. He would work on the project and do his best to help solve the technical problems. But he would also keep his eyes open and try to understand why the Zephyrians really wanted him here. 3 months passed quickly on Nexus Prime, and Jake found himself enjoying the work more than he had expected. The quantum resonance extractors were the most complex machines he had ever worked with. Each day brought new challenges that pushed his engineering skills to their limits. Jake's team had grown by 2 people. Captain Roy Baker arrived with a supply ship and stayed to provide security support. Dr. Helen Price joined them as a physicist specialist when the project needed more expertise in quantum mechanics. Both were smart and capable, which made Jake feel more confident about the human contribution to the project. The work itself was fascinating. Jake discovered that his human approach to engineering was different from the Zephyrian methods. Where the aliens focused on elegant mathematical solutions, Jake preferred practical designs that could be built and maintained easily. This combination was producing better results than either approach alone. Tech specialist Zormik had been assigned as Jake's primary assistant. Unlike the other Zephyrians, Zormik was young and curious about human methods. He asked many questions about Jake's engineering decisions and seemed genuinely interested in learning new approaches to problem solving. "Your species thinks about machines in a very different way," Zormik observed one day as they worked on a resonance calibration system. "You design them as if someone will need to fix them later." Jake laughed and nodded. "That's because someone always needs to fix them later. Machines break, and when they do, you want to be able to repair them quickly." The project was making excellent progress. Jake's modifications to the resonance extractors had solved several problems that had blocked the Zephyrian team for years. Commander Veltar visited the workshop regularly and always praised Jake's contributions. But Jake noticed that Veltar never answered direct questions about how the technology would be used. One evening, Jake was working late in the laboratory when he noticed something odd about the station's energy readings. The displays showed power consumption patterns that didn't match what he would expect from a research facility. There were massive energy drains in sections of the station that supposedly contained only living quarters and storage areas. Jake had always been curious about technical systems, and he couldn't resist investigating. Using his engineering access codes, he began tracing the power conduits through the station's computer network. What he found made no sense. Huge amounts of energy were being directed to areas that weren't marked on any of the station blueprints he had seen. The next day, Jake asked Zormik about the energy patterns. The young Zephyrian looked nervous and glanced around the laboratory before answering. "There are sections of the station that are used for other research projects," Zormik said quietly. "Projects that are classified above my security level." Jake sensed that Zormik knew more than he was saying. Over the following weeks, Jake began paying more attention to the restricted areas of the station. He noticed that certain corridors were always guarded, and that supply ships arrived regularly carrying containers that were immediately taken to the forbidden sections. One night, Jake's curiosity got the better of him. He used his engineering access to override a security door that led to one of the restricted areas. The corridor beyond was different from the rest of the station. The walls were darker and the air felt colder. Jake followed the corridor as it curved deeper into the station. What he found at the end of the corridor horrified him. Through a transparent wall, Jake could see a vast chamber filled with thousands of cylindrical pods. Each pod contained a human being floating in some kind of liquid. Cables connected the pods to massive computer systems that hummed with activity. Jake's hands shook as he realized what he was looking at. The Zephyrians were using human brains as biological processors for their quantum computers. The people in the pods weren't volunteers. They were prisoners whose minds were being harvested to power Zephyrian technology. Jake backed away from the viewing wall and tried to process what he had seen. The quantum resonance extractors he was helping to build weren't just for energy production. They were designed to power an expanded human harvesting operation. His own engineering work was making it possible for the Zephyrians to capture and exploit even more humans. Jake made his way back to his quarters without being detected. He sat on his bed and tried to think clearly about what to do next. If he tried to escape and warn Earth, the Zephyrians would probably kill his team and destroy the evidence. But if he stayed and continued working, he would be helping them commit terrible crimes against his own species. The next morning, Jake noticed that Zormik was acting even more nervous than usual. The young Zephyrian kept glancing at Jake as if he wanted to say something, but was afraid to speak. Finally, during their lunch break, Zormik approached Jake privately. "I need to show you something," Zormik said in a whisper, "but you must promise not to tell anyone that I was involved." Jake agreed and followed Zormik to a maintenance area where they could talk without being overheard. Zormik activated a portable datapad and showed Jake files that contained technical specifications for the human harvesting operation. "I thought you already knew about this," Zormik said with obvious distress. "I assumed that all the human engineers who worked here were informed about the full scope of the project." Jake studied the files and felt sick as he read the details. The Zephyrians had been capturing humans for over a century. Entire colonies had disappeared, and their populations had been brought to facilities like Nexus Prime. The harvesting operation provided the computing power for most of the Zephyrian Empire's advanced technology. "How many humans are being held here?" Jake asked. "Over 50,000 on this station alone," Zormik replied. "There are dozens of other facilities throughout Zephyrian space." Jake looked at the young alien and saw genuine remorse in his large, dark eyes. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because it's wrong," Zormik said simply. "When I joined this project, I believed we were working with humans as partners. I didn't know we were exploiting them as resources." Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to escape, he would stay and find a way to stop the harvesting operation. He would use his position as lead engineer to sabotage the system from within. "Can you help me?" Jake asked Zormik. The young Zephyrian nodded without hesitation. "What do you need me to do?" Jake spent the rest of the day planning. He would need to accomplish 3 things. First, he had to find a way to communicate with Earth without alerting the Zephyrians. Second, he needed to document evidence of the harvesting operation that could be used to expose the crimes. Third, he had to find a way to free the imprisoned humans without getting them all killed in the process. That evening, Jake met privately with Lisa and told her everything he had discovered. Lisa was horrified but not surprised. She had noticed that the Zephyrians were conducting biological research that they wouldn't explain to her. "I've been wondering why they needed a xenobiologist for an energy project," Lisa said. "Now it makes sense. They wanted my expertise to help them understand human physiology better." Jake and Lisa agreed to bring Captain Baker and Dr. Price into their conspiracy. Both humans were shocked by the revelations but immediately agreed to help. Captain Baker had military training that would be useful for any rescue operation. Dr. Price understood the quantum systems well enough to help Jake plan his sabotage. Jake began introducing subtle flaws into the quantum resonance extractors that would cause them to overload under certain conditions. The flaws were hidden so well that even Zormik couldn't detect them during normal testing. When the time came, Jake would be able to trigger a cascade failure that would disable the station's primary systems. As Jake worked on his sabotage plans, he couldn't stop thinking about the thousands of humans floating in those pods. Every day he continued working on the project meant more humans would be captured and enslaved. But if he acted too quickly, he might doom everyone, including the people he was trying to save. Jake knew he would only get one chance to stop the harvesting operation. When he made his move, it would have to be perfect. Jake knew he needed help from Earth, but communicating with home would be almost impossible. The Zephyrians monitored all official communication channels, and any suspicious messages would be detected immediately. He spent several days studying the station's communication systems before he found a solution. The quantum resonance extractors generated massive amounts of electromagnetic interference when they operated. Jake realized he could hide coded transmissions in the interference patterns. The messages would look like random noise to the Zephyrian monitoring systems, but someone who knew what to look for could decode them. Jake's first message went to Pete Collins, his former apprentice who now worked at the Human Engineering Corps on Earth. Pete was brilliant and trustworthy, exactly the kind of person Jake needed for this situation. The coded message contained basic information about the harvesting operation and instructions for Pete to contact Admiral Susan Clark. Admiral Clark had been Jake's commanding officer years ago when he served in the Human Space Navy. She was now one of the most senior military leaders in human space and had the authority to organize a rescue mission. More importantly, Jake trusted her to keep the operation secret until they were ready to act. It took 2 weeks for Jake to receive a reply from Pete. The return message was hidden in routine engineering data transmissions and contained confirmation that Admiral Clark was organizing a response. The Admiral was assembling a fleet of ships that would pose as a diplomatic mission while secretly carrying Special Forces troops. While Jake worked on communications with Earth, his team continued their investigation of the station. Lisa used her access to biological research areas to study how the human harvesting system worked. What she discovered was even worse than they had initially thought. The Zephyrians weren't just using human brains as computers. They were experimenting with ways to enhance human neural capacity through genetic modification and cybernetic implants. Some of the prisoners had been surgically altered to process information faster and more efficiently. They're treating humans like machines that can be upgraded, Lisa told Jake during one of their secret meetings. The modifications are keeping some people alive who should have died years ago, but they're not really living anymore. Captain Baker used his military training to map the station's security systems and identify potential escape routes. The station had dozens of docking bays and emergency pods that could be used to evacuate the rescued humans. But getting 50,000 people to the escape pods would require perfect timing and coordination. Dr. Price studied the quantum systems and helped Jake plan more sophisticated sabotage. She discovered that the resonance extractors were connected to every major system on the station through quantum field generators. If Jake could overload the extractors at just the right moment, the resulting energy cascade would disable weapons, shields, and artificial gravity throughout the station. Zormik proved to be an invaluable ally. The young Zephyrian had access to security codes and technical specifications that the humans couldn't obtain any other way. He also provided information about the station's daily routines and the schedules of the senior staff. Overseer Thexval is coming to the station next month, Zormik informed Jake during one of their private meetings. He's planning to announce a major expansion of the harvesting program. Jake realized this was the perfect opportunity. If they could expose the harvesting operation while Thexval was present, they would have the highest-ranking Zephyrian official as a witness. The evidence would be impossible for the Zephyrian government to deny or suppress. Jake sent another coded message to Pete with details about the timing and the arrival of Thexval. Admiral Clark's response indicated that the human fleet would arrive during the ceremony. The ships would appear to be providing security for the diplomatic event while actually preparing to attack the station. The plan began to take shape. Jake would trigger his sabotage during Thexval's ceremony, when most of the station's senior staff would be gathered in one location. The energy cascade would disable the station's defenses just as the human fleet arrived. While the Zephyrians dealt with the external attack, Jake's team would fight their way to the harvesting chambers and begin evacuating the prisoners. Lisa had been studying the neural interface systems and believed she could safely disconnect most of the humans from the quantum processors. The process would be dangerous and some people might not survive, but it was better than leaving them enslaved forever. We'll need to prioritize who to rescue first, Lisa explained to the team. Some of the prisoners have been connected to the system for decades, and disconnecting them might kill them. We should focus on the more recent captives who have a better chance of surviving the process. Captain Baker developed a plan for fighting their way through the station's security forces. The Zephyrians had advanced weapons, but they weren't expecting an attack from inside the station. If Jake's sabotage worked correctly, most of the automated defenses would be offline. Dr. Price calculated the exact timing needed for the quantum overload. The resonance extractors would need to be operating at maximum power when Jake triggered the cascade failure. This meant they would have to wait until the ceremony began. And the station's power systems were fully active. Jake spent his evenings studying the files that Zormik had provided about the harvesting operation. The scope of the program was staggering. The Zephyrians had been capturing humans from frontier colonies for over a century. Entire worlds had been depopulated and their inhabitants brought to processing stations throughout the Empire. The harvested humans provided the computing power for everything from Zephyrian military systems to their advanced manufacturing processes. Without the neural processors, Zephyrian technology would be centuries behind its current level. This explained why they had been so eager to help humanity develop space travel and establish colonies. They needed a steady supply of human brains to power their civilization. Jake also discovered that Dr. Webb had been feeding information to the Zephyrians about human settlements and population centers. Webb's reports had been used to select targets for harvesting raids. The man Jake had trusted to approve the mission was actually working with the enemy. "We can't let Webb know about our plans," Jake told his team. "If he warns the Zephyrians, they'll be ready for us." As the date of Thexaval's visit approached, Jake made final preparations for the sabotage. He had hidden trigger devices throughout the resonance extractor systems that would cause simultaneous overloads when activated. The resulting energy release would be visible from light years away and would serve as a signal to Admiral Clark's fleet. Jake also prepared evidence packages that would be broadcast throughout the galaxy during the attack. The packages contained video recordings of the harvesting chambers, technical specifications of the neural processing systems, and testimonies from Zormik about the scope of the program. 3 days before the ceremony, Jake received his final message from Earth. Admiral Clark confirmed that 12 human warships were approaching the neutron star system, disguised as a diplomatic escort. The ships carried over 2,000 Special Forces troops and enough transport capacity to evacuate all the prisoners from the station. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. In 3 days, he would trigger events that could start a war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. But he also knew that doing nothing would mean allowing the harvesting program to continue and expand. Lisa found Jake in his quarters the night before the ceremony. She sat beside him and they both stared out the window at the neutron star spinning in the distance. "Are you sure about this?" Lisa asked quietly. Jake nodded without hesitation. "Those people in the pods are counting on us even if they don't know it. We're probably their only chance for freedom. And if we fail, then at least the galaxy will know what the Zephyrians have been doing," Jake replied. "Sometimes that's enough to change everything." Jake spent his final night on Nexus Prime checking and rechecking his preparations. Tomorrow would bring either liberation for 50,000 enslaved humans or death for everyone involved in the rescue attempt. But Jake had made his choice and he was ready to see it through to the end. The morning of Overseer Thexval's arrival brought unusual activity throughout Nexus Prime. Zephyrian staff members worked frantically to prepare the main assembly hall for the ceremony. Jake watched the preparations while making final adjustments to his sabotage devices, his hand steady despite the tension he felt. Admiral Clark's fleet had arrived during the night, maintaining the pretense of a diplomatic escort. Jake could see the human ships through the station windows, their sleek hulls reflecting the light from the neutron star. To any observer, they appeared to be providing routine security for the ceremony. Overseer Thexval's personal transport docked with great ceremony. The Overseer was even more imposing than Commander Veltar, with darker blue skin marked by intricate patterns that indicated his high rank. He wore robes that seemed to absorb light, and his presence made even the senior station staff nervous. Jake positioned himself in the main laboratory where he could monitor the station's power systems during the ceremony. The quantum resonance extractors were operating at maximum efficiency to provide power for the expanded life support and communication systems needed for the gathering. Lisa and Dr. Price had taken positions near the restricted areas where they could quickly reach the harvesting chambers when the attack began. Captain Baker was in the security center, ready to disable the internal monitoring systems that might interfere with their movements. Zormic found Jake in the laboratory an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The young Zephyrian looked terrified but determined. "I've disabled the security cameras in the corridors leading to the harvesting chambers," Zormic reported quietly. "The guards will still be there, but at least you won't be tracked by the monitoring systems." Jake gripped Zormic's shoulder gratefully. "When this starts, find a safe place and stay there. Things are going to get very dangerous very quickly." The ceremony began with traditional Zephyrian music that filled the station with haunting melodies. Overseer Thexaval took his place at the center of the main assembly hall, surrounded by hundreds of Zephyrian officials and scientists. Jake watched through the laboratory's viewing screens as the Overseer began his presentation about the expansion of their research programs. Jake's anger grew as he listened to Thexval describe the harvesting operation using euphemisms like biological computing, partnerships, and neural resource development. The Overseer spoke about humans as if they were valuable equipment rather than living beings with rights and dignity. When Thexval announced plans to triple the size of the harvesting program over the next 5 years, Jake decided he had heard enough. He activated the first sequence of his sabotage program, sending coded signals to the trigger devices hidden throughout the resonance extractor systems. The overload began slowly, with minor fluctuations in the power distribution network that the Zephyrian technicians dismissed as normal variations. But Jake had designed the cascade to build gradually, becoming unstoppable once it reached critical levels. Admiral Clark must have been watching for Jake's signal because the human fleet suddenly dropped their diplomatic pretense. The warships activated their weapons and began jamming the station's communication systems. Jake could see energy beams lancing out from the human ships to disable the automated defense platforms around the station. The first major power surge hit, just as Overseer Thexval was explaining the technical details of the expanded harvesting program. Emergency lights began flashing throughout the station and alarm systems started wailing. The Overseer stopped speaking and looked around in confusion as his staff rushed to emergency stations. Jake triggered the second phase of his sabotage and the quantum resonance extractors began overloading in sequence. Massive energy discharges erupted from the primary power cores, sending electromagnetic pulses through every system on the station. The lights went out and artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. In the darkness and chaos, Jake ran from the laboratory toward the restricted sections of the station. He carried a portable emergency light and a plasma cutter that he had modified for use as a weapon. Behind him, he could hear explosions as the overloaded extractors destroyed themselves and damaged the surrounding infrastructure. Lisa and Dr. Price were already at the entrance to the first harvesting chamber when Jake arrived. Captain Baker had disabled the electronic locks, but they still needed to cut through the physical barriers. Jake's plasma cutter made quick work of the reinforced doors. The chamber beyond contained 2,000 humans floating in their cylindrical pods. The sight was even more horrifying than Jake remembered. Many of the prisoners showed signs of surgical modification, with cybernetic implants visible through their translucent skin. "Start with the pods near the entrance," Lisa directed, as she began the delicate process of disconnecting the neural interfaces. "These people have been here the shortest time and have the best chance of surviving the disconnection." Dr. Price worked frantically to shut down the quantum processing systems that were drawing power from the human brains. Each pod had to be disconnected individually to prevent fatal shock to the nervous system. The process was slow and dangerous, but it was the only way to free the prisoners safely. Jake heard footsteps in the corridor and turned to see Zephyrian security guards approaching with energy weapons. Captain Baker had armed himself with captured Zephyrian equipment and opened fire on the guards. The corridor erupted in plasma, beams and laser bursts as the two sides fought for control of the chamber entrance. More explosions rocked the station as Admiral Clark's forces continued their assault on the external defenses. Jake could feel the deck plating vibrating under his feet as the human warships targeted the station's structural weak points. The Zephyrians were caught between the external attack and the internal sabotage. Zormik appeared in the chamber carrying additional plasma cutters that he had stolen from maintenance areas. "I brought tools to help with the pod disconnections," he said breathlessly. "And I have access codes for the other chambers." Jake accepted one of the plasma cutters and began working on a cluster of pods while Lisa and Dr. Price handled the delicate neural disconnections. The first prisoner they freed was a middle-aged woman who had been captured from a mining colony 3 years earlier. She was weak and disoriented but alive. "Where am I?" the woman asked in a voice that was barely a whisper. "You're being rescued," Jake told her as he helped her out of the pod. "Stay close to us and we'll get you to safety." The rescue work continued as more prisoners were freed from their cybernetic prisons. Some had been connected to the system for so long that disconnecting them was impossible without causing death. Jake made the painful decision to focus on those who could be saved, rather than risk everyone to attempt impossible rescues. Captain Baker fell back into the chamber as more Zephyrian guards arrived. His improvised uniform was torn and burned from energy weapon hits, but he was still fighting effectively. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they bring up heavy weapons," he warned Jake. Dr. Webb suddenly appeared in the chamber entrance with a group of Zephyrian security officers. Jake realized that Webb had led them directly to the rescue operation. The traitor pointed at Jake with obvious satisfaction. "There's your saboteur," Webb announced to the Zephyrian guards. "Engineer Morrison is responsible for the power failures and the unauthorized access to classified areas." Jake felt rage boiling inside him as he faced the man who had betrayed humanity for alien technology. "How long have you been working for them, Webb?" "Long enough to understand that cooperation is better than resistance," Webb replied coldly. "The Zephyrians offered me knowledge and power that humanity could never provide." Lisa stepped forward and struck Webb with a plasma cutter before he could say anything else. The traitor collapsed as Captain Baker opened fire on the Zephyrian guards. The battle for the harvesting chamber had become desperate, and Jake knew they were running out of time. Another massive explosion shook the station as Admiral Clark's fleet intensified their assault. Jake could see through the chamber's viewing ports that pieces of the station's outer hull were breaking away. The human warships were systematically destroying Nexus Prime's ability to function as a military installation. "We need to get these people to the escape pods now," Jake shouted over the noise of battle and alarms. The freed prisoners were weak and confused, but they could walk with assistance. Jake's team began moving them toward the emergency evacuation routes that Captain Baker had identified. Commander Veltar appeared in the corridor with a squad of elite guards, blocking their path to the escape pods. The Zephyrian commander's robes were torn and his calm demeanor had been replaced by obvious fury. "You have destroyed years of research and killed hundreds of my people," Veltar said to Jake. "Did you really think your primitive species could challenge Zephyrian power?" Jake faced the alien commander without fear. "We just proved that cooperation built on lies and slavery won't last forever. Your people made the mistake of underestimating human determination. The battle for the harvesting chambers had become a fight for the future of human freedom in the galaxy." The confrontation with Commander Veltar lasted only seconds before another massive explosion rocked the station. Admiral Clark's forces had breached the main hull, and human Special Forces troops were fighting their way through the corridors. Veltar and his guards were forced to retreat as plasma fire erupted from multiple directions. Jake's team continued evacuating the freed prisoners toward the emergency pods. The rescued humans moved slowly due to their weakened condition, but their determination to escape was stronger than their physical limitations. Many of them had been imprisoned for years, and the chance of freedom gave them strength they didn't know they still possessed. Zormik led them through maintenance passages that avoided the main corridors where Zephyrian forces were regrouping. The young aliens' knowledge of the station's layout proved invaluable as they navigated through sections damaged by Jake's sabotage and Admiral Clark's assault. "The docking bay is just ahead," Zormik reported as they reached a junction of corridors. "But there are guards posted at the entrance." Captain Baker moved forward to scout the situation. Through a viewing port, he could see that the Zephyrians had established a defensive position around the escape pods. The guards were heavily armed and had energy shields that would make a direct assault extremely dangerous. "We need a distraction," Baker told Jake. something to draw their attention away from the docking bay. Jake had been carrying a remote detonator for the remaining sabotage devices throughout the station. He had planned to save them for an emergency, but this situation qualified. Jake activated the detonator and sent signals to the explosive charges he had hidden in the station's secondary power systems. The resulting explosions were visible through the station's outer viewports as entire sections of Nexus Prime erupted in flames and debris. The Zephyrian guards at the docking bay left their positions to respond to the new emergency, giving Jake's team the opening they needed. Lisa and Dr. Price helped load the rescued prisoners into the escape pods while Captain Baker secured the docking bay. Jake worked frantically to program the pod's navigation systems to rendezvous with Admiral Clark's fleet. The pods were designed for short-range evacuation, but they would be able to reach the human ships if they launched quickly. The first group of escape pods launched just as Overseer Thexval arrived at the docking bay with a large force of guards. The senior Zephyrian official was furious, and his ornate robes were torn from moving through the damaged station. He pointed at Jake with obvious hatred. "You have committed acts of terrorism against a peaceful research facility," Thexval declared. "The Galactic Confederation will hear of this unprovoked attack." Jake faced the Overseer without backing down. "The galaxy will hear about it, but they'll learn the truth about your harvesting program. We've been broadcasting evidence of your crimes throughout the galaxy. While we fought to free your prisoners, Dr. Price had indeed been transmitting the documented evidence using the station's own communication arrays, video recordings of the harvesting chambers, technical specifications of the neural processing systems, and testimony from Zormik about the scope of the program were being sent to news networks and government officials across known space." Thexval's expression changed from anger to concern as he realized the implications of the evidence being made public. The Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation on being benevolent guides for younger species. The revelation of the harvesting program would destroy that image and potentially cause their client species to rebel. "Those humans volunteered for the research program," Thexval said desperately. "They were willing participants in scientific advancement." "Tell that to the woman we rescued who was taken from her home 3 years ago," Jake replied. "Or the man who was captured while defending his colony from your raiders." More escape pods launched as Jake's team continued the evacuation. Admiral Clark's ships moved closer to provide protection for the fleeing pods. The human warships were taking damage from the station's remaining defensive weapons, but they maintained their positions to ensure the rescue operation could continue. Commander Veltar made one final attempt to stop the evacuation by trying to activate the station's self-destruct system. But Jake had anticipated this possibility and had sabotaged the self-destruct controls along with everything else. Instead of destroying the station, Veltar's activation attempt caused additional explosions that further damaged the Zephyrian defenses. Zormik helped load the last group of prisoners into escape pods while Jake and Captain Baker held off the remaining guards. The young Zephyrian had proven his loyalty beyond any doubt, and Jake was determined to ensure his safety. "Come with us," Jake told Zormik as they prepared to board the final escape pod. "Your own people will consider you a traitor for helping us." Zormik nodded gratefully and followed Jake into the pod. As they launched from the disintegrating station, Jake looked back at Nexus Prime and saw that it was breaking apart under the combined effects of his sabotage and Admiral Clark's assault. The massive research facility that had hidden such terrible secrets was finally being destroyed. The escape pods were recovered by Admiral Clark's fleet, and the rescued prisoners were given medical treatment aboard the human ships. Many of them were in poor condition due to years of neural exploitation, but they were alive and free. The medical teams worked around the clock to help them recover from their ordeal. Jake met with Admiral Clark aboard her flagship to plan the next phase of the operation. The evidence they had gathered needed to be presented to the Galactic Confederation before the Zephyrians could suppress it or create false explanations for what had happened. "We captured Overseer Thexval during the final evacuation," Admiral Clark reported. "He's demanding to speak with Zephyrian diplomats, but he's also our best witness to the scope of the harvesting program. The evidence broadcasts that Dr. Price had transmitted were causing massive political upheaval throughout the galaxy. Several species that had been clients of the Zephyrian Empire were demanding explanations about their own missing populations." The carefully constructed image of Zephyrian benevolence was crumbling as more evidence emerged. Within weeks, the Galactic Confederation convened emergency hearings to investigate the harvesting program. Jake testified about what he had discovered on Nexus Prime, and the rescued prisoners provided first-hand accounts of their captivity. Zormic's testimony was particularly damaging because it came from a Zephyrian who had witnessed the program from the inside. The political consequences were swift and severe. The Zephyrian Empire lost its position of leadership in the Confederation, as client species declared independence and formed new alliances. Several other alien races came forward with evidence of similar exploitation, revealing that the harvesting program was even larger than Jake had initially discovered. Human technology, particularly Jake's innovations in quantum engineering, became highly valued as species throughout the galaxy sought alternatives to Zephyrian systems. Humanity's reputation changed from junior partners to respected equals almost overnight. Jake retired from active engineering but accepted a position as advisor to the new Galactic Ethics Council that was formed to prevent future exploitation. His experience in exposing the harvesting program made him an expert on identifying and stopping technological abuse. Lisa continued her xenobiology research but focused on helping the rescued prisoners recover from their neural modifications. Many of them suffered permanent damage, but her work helped hundreds of people regain normal brain function and return to productive lives. Zormic was granted asylum among humans and became an advocate for Zephyrian reform. His courage in exposing the harvesting program inspired other young Zephyrians to speak out against their government's policies. He eventually returned to Zephyrian space as part of a reform movement that sought to rebuild their civilization on ethical foundations. Dr. Webb was tried for treason and sentenced to life imprisonment. For his role in the harvesting program, his betrayal had made possible the capture of thousands of humans, and the evidence of his collaboration was overwhelming. 5 years after the destruction of Nexus Prime, Jake attended the dedication of a memorial station built where the research facility had once orbited the neutron star. The memorial contained the names of all known victims of the harvesting program, both those who were rescued and those who died in captivity. Jake placed a flower at the memorial wall and thought about the thousands of people who had been freed because of his decision to fight rather than flee. The victory had come at a high cost, but it had also proven that no species, no matter how advanced, could subjugate others indefinitely. The galaxy was a different place now, with stronger protections for individual rights and more oversight of research programs. Jake's engineering innovations continued to provide clean energy for dozens of worlds, but they were used only with the informed consent of all involved parties. As Jake looked out at the stars from the memorial station, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. His vengeance against the Zephyrians had served justice rather than mere personal satisfaction. The dark secret of the alien station had been exposed, and the galaxy was safer because of the courage of a few individuals who refused to accept evil as inevitable.